You think honey lasts forever because it's sweet. You think milk spoils because it's fragile. You think one is preserved and the other is not, as if nature simply decided to be generous with bees and cruel with cows. That's not what's happening. When archaeologists opened Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922, they found gold, carved stone, ceremonial weapons, and furniture that had survived 3,000 years of absolute darkness. But the detail that stops people, the detail that should stop you, is not the gold, it is the honey. 3,000-year-old honey, still liquid, still amber, still chemically recognizable as honey, not a fossil, not a residue. The actual substance, intact, as though time had simply decided not to touch it. And milk in your refrigerator right now will not last the week. Both sit in the same kitchen. Both obey the same laws of physics. Both are made of atoms that the universe would very much like to rearrange into something simpler. One resists for millennia. The other collapses in days. Most people reach for a quick answer: sugars, acidity, bacteria, and feel satisfied. But those answers are descriptions. They tell you what happens. They say nothing about why the universe permits one and dismantles the other. Richard Feynman had an answer. Not a chemistry answer, a physics answer. And once you follow it to its conclusion, it does not just explain honey and milk. It reframes everything you thought you understood about permanence, decay, and time itself. The universe has a preference. Here is the thing most explanations get wrong. They tell you honey survives because of its acidity, its sugar content, its antibacterial properties. All true. But those are descriptions. They tell you what, not why. The why goes much deeper, all the way down to the most fundamental bias built into the fabric of physical reality. The universe has a strong, consistent, mathematically provable preference for disorder over order. Not because it is malicious, not because it targets complex things specifically, but because disorder is statistically overwhelming. For every one way that atoms can be arranged into something complex and structured, a protein, a living cell, a jar of honey, there are billions upon billions of ways they can be arranged into something simpler and more scattered. Random processes, given enough time and thermal energy, will almost always move toward the more probable arrangement. Always. Without exception. Why, this is not chemistry. This is not biology. This is mathematics applied to the behavior of matter. This principle has a name. The second law of thermodynamics, and it is arguably the most consequential law in all of physics, not because it describes exotic phenomena at extreme energies or velocities, but because it governs everything you experience every day. It is the reason things decay, age, and fall apart without effort, while building and preserving them requires constant energy input. It is the reason you have never watched a shattered glass reassemble itself from the floor. It is the reason spoiled milk has never spontaneously become fresh again. The universe is not breaking things down out of hostility. It is simply moving, always and relentlessly, toward configurations that are statistically more probable than the ones that currently exist. Both honey and milk are ordered, structured, low-probability arrangements of atoms sitting in a universe that statistically prefers simpler arrangements. The universe wants to dismantle both of them. The question is not whether. The question is how fast and what controls the speed of that dismantling. Feynman understood that this single insight, entropy as statistical inevitability rather than chemical process, was the lens through which the honey-milk question had to be viewed. Everything else follows from it. What milk actually is. You picture milk as a simple liquid, white, smooth, uniform, something that exists quietly in one state until it doesn't. That picture is wrong in almost every detail. Milk is three fundamentally different types of mixture occupying the same space simultaneously. Fat globules suspended in water, enormous protein structures called casein micelles, floating in careful electrical balance, repelling each other just enough not to collapse into a solid mass. Lactose sugar dissolved throughout, enzymes waiting to catalyze chemical reactions, immunoglobulins, trace minerals, all of it coexisting in a state of fragile, temporary tension that requires specific physical conditions to maintain. And that the universe is constantly, quietly working to undo. Every single component of milk exists in a configuration that is not its lowest energy state. The fats want to separate, and they will, rising toward the surface as cream because fat and water have molecular structures that fundamentally prefer not to intermingle. The proteins want to aggregate, to fold, clump, and precipitate out of suspension because maintaining large, complex molecular architectures requires thermodynamic energy that the universe would rather release. The lactose is waiting to be metabolized, carrying stored chemical energy that any organism capable of breaking it down will extract without hesitation. Milk is not a stable substance that occasionally goes bad. It is an unstable substance that is constantly, actively, energetically trying to reach a more stable state. The spoiling of milk is not an accident or an intrusion. It is the universe collecting a debt that was owed from the moment the milk was produced. Bacteria speed this process up dramatically, by many orders of magnitude. But they are not the cause of spoilage. They are passengers on a process that thermodynamics had already scheduled. Remove bacteria entirely through complete sterilization, and milk still separates, still degrades, still moves toward equilibrium. More slowly, but inevitably. In physical terms, bacteria are catalysts for the inevitable. Molecular machines that lower the energy barrier between where milk currently is and where the universe wants it to be. They make the journey faster. They did not choose the destination. Milk spoils quickly because it provides every tool the universe needs to increase disorder. Abundant free water, mobile molecules, accessible stored energy, open thermodynamic pathways in every direction. It is, in the most literal physical sense, a system with almost no resistance to entropy. A system that the universe can reach into and rearrange almost immediately. Water is the mechanism. You think of water as passive, a background ingredient, the neutral medium in which interesting chemistry happens, the stage, not the actor. You dissolve things in it, dilute things with it, use it to carry what you need from one place to another. In your mental picture, water facilitates processes without being the process itself. Water is not passive. Water is the primary mechanism through which entropy is delivered to almost every biological and chemical system on Earth. Remove it, and you do not merely slow the chemistry. You withdraw the universe's primary instrument for doing thermodynamic work on molecular systems. Now, water molecules are electrically asymmetric. The oxygen atom pulls electron density away from the two hydrogen atoms, creating a molecule that is slightly negative on one end and slightly positive on the other. This polarity makes water molecules extraordinarily interactive. They form hydrogen bonds with each other and with almost every charged or polar molecule they encounter. They are constantly moving, rotating, forming and breaking bonds, facilitating chemical reactions, distributing thermal energy through a system. In biological systems, water is not the background. It is an active participant in virtually every molecular process, including every process involved in food spoilage. Enzymes, the molecular machines that drive chemical transformation, including the breakdown of proteins, fats, and sugars in decaying food, require water to function. Not as a solvent sitting around them, but as an active mechanical participant. Enzymes work by physically changing shape as they bind to target molecules. That conformational change, that molecular flexing, requires the enzyme to be mobile and hydrated. Take the water away and the enzyme does not slow down. It stops completely. Its capacity to function remains intact. Its opportunity to function has been removed entirely. Now consider honey. Fresh honey contains roughly 15 to 17% water by mass. That sounds significant. But the number that matters is not total water content. It is what scientists call water activity, a measure of how much water is actually free and available to participate in chemical and biological processes, not as opposed to being tightly bound to other molecules and effectively locked in place. Honey's water activity sits at approximately 0.6 or below. Most bacteria require a water activity of at least 0.91 to grow. Most molds require at least 0.70. Even the most drought-resistant microorganisms on Earth struggle below 0.65. Honey's sugar concentration is so extreme that almost every water molecule inside it is captured, bound tightly to glucose and fructose through hydrogen bonds, immobilized, unable to participate in the molecular interactions that entropy-increasing processes require. Bacteria that land in honey are not slowly defeated. They are immediately and violently desiccated. The osmotic pressure gradient between the interior of a bacterial cell and the surrounding sugar environment is so extreme that water is pulled out of the cell faster than any biological response can compensate. The bacterium does not starve. It does not suffocate. It is physically wrung dry by the mathematics of concentration. Honey does not fight entropy. It removes almost every pathway through which entropy can reach it. The universe still prefers disorder. It always prefers disorder. But preference without a mechanism to act on it is completely inert. Honey has not defeated the laws of physics. It has simply made itself, under the right conditions, almost entirely inaccessible to them. The geometry of the impossible. Here is where the explanation becomes something more interesting than food science. Entropy is not a force. It does not push matter toward disorder the way gravity pulls objects toward the ground. It is a statistical bias, a consequence of the overwhelming numerical imbalance between disordered and ordered states. Random molecular motion moves systems toward disorder for the same reason that randomly shuffling a deck of cards almost never produces a perfectly sorted arrangement. Not because something prevents order, because ordered states are so astronomically rare that random processes almost never find them. But statistical bias requires accessible states. The system must be physically capable of reaching more probable configurations through the thermal fluctuations available to it. If the landscape of possible molecular transitions contains no accessible pathways toward higher entropy, if every route toward disorder requires water that does not exist or molecular mobility that the system cannot support, then the universe's statistical preference becomes irrelevant. It is a preference it cannot act on. Think of it as a landscape. Every molecular system exists in an energy landscape full of valleys and hills. The deepest valleys represent the most stable, lowest energy configurations. Shallower valleys represent less stable states. To move from one valley to another, a system must climb over the hill between them. It must acquire enough thermal energy to cross the activation barrier. Honey sits in an unusually deep valley surrounded by unusually high hills. The more disordered configurations the universe prefers are still there, still lower in overall probability terms, still thermodynamically favored. But getting there from honey's current state requires crossing barriers that, under normal conditions, are simply not crossable. The roads to disorder exist on the map. They simply do not exist in the actual terrain. Honey is not a fortress defending itself against entropy. It is a landscape without roads. Bacteria and enzymes, understood this way, are not invaders or attackers. They are, in thermodynamic terms, road builders. They are molecular structures that evolution has refined into extraordinarily efficient mechanisms for lowering activation barriers, for creating pathways between ordered states and the more probable, disordered ones the universe prefers. When bacteria metabolize milk, they are not doing something foreign to it. They are facilitating a thermodynamic transition that was already preferred. They make the journey possible. They did not invent the destination. Remove the bacteria, and the destination remains unchanged. The journey simply becomes slower and more difficult, proceeding only through the limited spontaneous thermal fluctuations available to the system. In milk, those fluctuations are sufficient because the activation barriers are low and free water is abundant. In honey, even without any biological agent present, the barriers are so high and accessible. Water so scarce that spontaneous thermodynamic transitions occur at rates that are, on human timescales, essentially imperceptible. What never expires actually means honey never expires. You have heard this so many times it has the weight of established fact. It feels absolute, categorical, one of those rare clean truths that needs no qualification. It is not absolute. It is deeply, consequentially conditional. And the conditions are doing all the work. What the statement actually means, stated precisely, is this: honey stored in a sealed container, kept dry, maintained at stable temperatures, protected from contamination, shows no detectable degradation over timescales relevant to human civilization. Every single word in that sentence is load-bearing. Introduce moisture, even the ambient humidity from leaving a jar open in a warm kitchen, and honey's water activity begins to rise. As it crosses 0.65, osmophilic yeasts, organisms specifically adapted to high-sugar environments, gain the foothold they need. Fermentation begins. The glucose and fructose that were locked in thermodynamic stability become metabolic fuel. Within days or weeks, the honey that survived 3 millennia in a sealed tomb transforms into something unrecognizable. Not because anything went wrong, because the physical conditions that were blocking thermodynamic inevitability were removed. In physics, stability does not mean permanence. It means a system occupies a local energy minimum, a configuration that requires significant energy input to change. Like a ball resting at the bottom of a valley, it resists small disturbances but will roll toward a lower configuration if pushed hard enough. Honey occupies an unusually deep local minimum. The activation barriers surrounding its current molecular state are remarkably high, but they are not infinite. And nothing in the physical universe has infinite activation barriers. On cosmological timescales, this becomes unavoidable. In approximately 5 billion years, the sun will exhaust its hydrogen fuel and expand into a red giant, likely incinerating the Earth's surface. Every jar of honey that has ever existed, every molecule of glucose and fructose, every trace of organic chemistry will be thermally decomposed into its constituent atoms and redistributed into expanding stellar plasma. The local minimum honey occupies will not be overcome. It will cease to exist because the landscape that defined it will be destroyed entirely. Nothing is preserved in any absolute sense. Some configurations of matter have very high barriers between their current state and their next thermodynamically preferred one. We call them stable, or we call them permanent. Sometimes we call them eternal. What we are really describing in every case is a rate, a probability of transition per unit time, so vanishingly small that it becomes, for all practical purposes, indistinguishable from zero. Honey does not defeat entropy. It negotiates an extraordinarily favorable delay, a delay so long it exceeds the span of human civilization by orders of magnitude. But a delay nonetheless, the same destination. Honey and milk are not opposites. This is the realization the entire argument has been building toward. And it is more unsettling the longer you sit with it. They are 2 points on the same continuum. 2 collections of atoms, subject to identical physical laws, pointed toward identical thermodynamic destinations, separated only by the rate at which the universe can find its way in. Milk reaches a measurably higher entropy state in days. Honey resists for thousands of years. The ratio between these timescales is enormous by human standards, hundreds of thousands to 1. But set against the 13.8 billion-year age of the observable universe, the difference between a week and 3,000 years is cosmologically indistinguishable. Both are rounding errors in the arithmetic of entropy. Both are instantaneous on the timescale of physics. The universe began, for reasons that remain one of the deepest unsolved problems in theoretical physics, in an extraordinarily ordered and improbable low-entropy state. There is no known physical law that required this. It simply was, and has been moving toward higher entropy, toward greater disorder, toward more probable configurations of matter and energy, ever since. Feynman, Boltzmann, Penrose, and Carroll have all confronted this mystery directly. Why did the universe start so ordered, so far from the equilibrium it has been approaching ever since? The honest answer, the only honest answer, is that we do not know. We can describe the trajectory with extraordinary precision. We cannot fully explain the starting point. But that improbable beginning is the reason everything complex exists. Stars formed because the early universe was ordered enough for gravity to concentrate matter into dense, low-entropy configurations. Planets formed around those stars, on at least one of them. Chemistry became complex enough that matter began organizing itself into structures capable of capturing energy and maintaining local order against the thermodynamic tide, what we call life. You exist because the universe began with enough thermodynamic credit to fund billions of years of increasing complexity before the bill comes due. Milk is that complexity, spending itself quickly. Honey is that complexity, spending itself slowly. Both are spending. Both are moving in the same direction. The arrow of time points one way for everything, without exception, without favoritism. The jar from Tutankhamun's tomb is not a story about preservation. It is a story about rate, about the remarkable, contingent, condition-dependent slowness with which one particular molecular configuration loses its battle against probability. The honey did not win. It has simply not finished losing yet. Neither have you. Every protein in your body, every memory encoded in your neurons, every mountain range and ocean and spinning galaxy is honey, a local energy minimum of some depth, persisting for some duration, moving at some rate toward the same inevitable endpoint. The universe is not hostile to order. It is indifferent to it the way statistics is indifferent to any specific outcome. It does not target honey or milk or stars or civilizations. It follows probability. And probability, given sufficient time, is the closest thing to absolute that physics can offer. This is Feynman's disturbing answer. Not a chemistry lesson about water activity and sugar concentration. Not a biology lecture about bacteria and enzymes. A quiet, precise, devastating observation that the difference between things that last and things that don't is never a difference in kind. It is always a difference in rate, in the depth of the valley, in the height of the barrier between now and next. The universe does not distinguish between honey and milk. It is simply more patient with one than the other, and it is infinitely patient with everything.